Blondine grew to be 7 years old, and Brunette 3. The king had given Blondine a charming little carriage drawn by ostriches, and a little coachman 10 years of age, who was the nephew of her nurse. The little page, who was called Gourmandinet, loved Blondine tenderly. He had been her playmate from her birth, and she had shown him 1,000 acts of kindness. But Gourmandinet had one terrible fault. He was a gourmand so fond of dainties and sweet things that for a paper of bonbons he would commit almost any wicked action. Blondine often said to him, "I love you dearly, Gourmandinet, but I do not love to see you so greedy. I entreat you to correct this villainous fault, which will make you despised by all the world." Gourmandinet kissed her hand and promised to reform. But alas, he continued to steal cakes from the kitchen and bonbons from the storeroom. Often, indeed, he was whipped for his disobedience and gluttony. The Queen Forbette heard on every hand the reproaches lavished upon the page, and she was cunning enough to think that she might make use of this weakness of Gourmandinet, and thus get rid of poor Blondine. The garden in which Blondine drove in her little carriage, drawn by ostriches, and guided by her little coachman, Gourmandinet, was separated by a grating from an immense and magnificent forest, called the Forest of Lilacs, because during the whole year these lilacs were always covered with superb flowers. No one, however, entered these woods. It was well known that it was enchanted ground, and that if you once entered there, you could never hope to escape. Gourmandinet knew the terrible secret of this forest. He had been severely forbidden ever to drive the carriage of Blondine in that direction, lest by some chance Blondine might pass the grating and place her little feet on the enchanted ground. Many times the King Benin had sought to build a wall the entire length of the grating, or to secure it in some way so as to make an entrance there impossible. But the workmen had no sooner laid the foundation than some unknown and invisible power raised the stones, and they disappeared from sight. The Queen Forbette now sought diligently to gain the friendship of Gourmandinet by giving him every day some delicious dainties. In this way, she made him so complete a slave to his appetite that he could not live without the jellies, bonbons, and cakes which she gave him in such profusion. At last, she sent for him to come to her, and said, "Gourmandinet, it depends entirely upon yourself whether you shall have a large trunk full of bonbons and delicious dainties, or never again eat one during your life." "Never again eat one? Oh, madam, I should die of such punishment. Speak, madam, what must I do to escape this terrible fate?" It was necessary, she told him, with a look that pierced through his very soul, that he should drive the Princess Blondine near to the Forest of Lilacs. Gourmandinet, however, could not bring himself to agree, for the king had forbidden it. The queen, unimpressed, declared that without his compliance, he would be denied all dainties henceforth. In desperation, Gourmandinet begged her not to be so cruel, pleading for a task that he could actually perform. But the queen repeated her command, insisting that he encourage the princess to cross the grating into the enchanted ground. Gourmandinet turned pale at the thought, for he knew the penalty of entering the enchanted forest was certain doom. With a fearsome frown, the queen gave her final ultimatum. Obedience would grant him endless bonbons, while refusal meant eternal denial. Concerned about the punishment from the king, Gourmandinet was reassured by the queen's promise of protection and future fortune. Gourmandinet hesitated, torn between loyalty to his dear princess and the temptation of the queen's offer. That night he lay awake, consumed by guilt and indecision, seeking a way out of the wicked queen's grasp. But the fear of the queen's revenge, and the hope of one day rescuing Blondine, led him to a grim decision. "But, madam," replied Gourmandinet, turning very pale, "if the princess enters this forest, she can never escape from it. You know the penalty of entering upon enchanted ground. To send my dear princess, there is to give her up to certain death." "For the third and last time," said the queen, frowning fearfully, "I ask if you will take the princess to the forest. Choose! Either an immense box of bonbons, which I will renew every month, or never again to taste the delicacies which you love." Gourmandinet stood silent, his heart torn between loyalty to Princess Blondine and the tantalizing promise of endless sweets. Gourmandinet hesitated and reflected a few moments longer, and alas, at last resolved to sacrifice his good little mistress to his gluttony. The remainder of that day he still hesitated, and lay awake all night, weeping bitter tears as he endeavoured to discover some way to escape from the power of the wicked queen. In the morning at 10 o'clock, Blondine ordered her little carriage and entered it for a drive, after having embraced the king her father and promised him to return in 2 hours. Gourmandinet, on starting, turned the ostriches away from the Forest of Lilacs. When, however, they were entirely out of sight of the palace, he changed his course and turned towards the grating which separated them from the enchanted ground. "What is the matter?" said Blondine kindly. "You say nothing. Are you ill, Gourmandinet?" "No, my princess, I am well. But how pale you are! Tell me what distresses you, poor boy, and I promise to do all in my power to make you happy." Blondine's kind inquiries and attentions almost softened the hard heart of Gourmandinet, but the remembrance of the bonbons promised by the wicked queen, Fourbette, soon chased away his good resolutions. Before he had time to reply, the ostriches reached the grating of the Forest of Lilacs. "Oh, the beautiful lilacs!" exclaimed Blondine. "How fragrant, how delicious! I must have a bouquet of those beautiful flowers for my good papa." Gourmandinet hesitated, remembering the queen's orders, but struggling with his loyalty to Blondine. Without hesitation, Blondine sprang lightly from the carriage, crossed the bars of the grating, and commenced to gather the flowers. At this moment, Gourmandinet shuddered and was overwhelmed with remorse. He wished to repair his fault by calling Blondine, but although she was only 10 steps from him, she could not hear his voice, and in a short time she was lost to view in the enchanted forest. "What is the matter?" said Blondine kindly. "You say nothing. Are you ill, Gourmandinet?" "No, my princess, I am well. But how pale you are! Tell me what distresses you, poor boy, and I promise to do all in my power to make you happy." Blondine's kind inquiries and attentions almost softened the hard heart of Gourmandinet, but the remembrance of the bonbons promised by the wicked queen, Fourbette, soon chased away his good resolutions. Blondine, unaware of the enchantment that surrounded her, gathered the lilacs with joy, her heart light and carefree. Meanwhile, Gourmandinet stood by, his heart heavy with the weight of his betrayal. The promise of sweets had chained him, but he now felt the sting of remorse. Desperation clawed at his chest as he wished to call her back, to undo his wrong, but his voice would not carry across the enchanted boundary. As Blondine moved deeper into the forest, she was soon lost from sight, leaving Gourmandinet alone with his regret. At this moment, Gourmandinet shuddered and was overwhelmed with remorse. He wished to repair his fault by calling Blondine, but although she was only 10 steps from him, she could not hear his voice, and in a short time she was lost to view in the enchanted forest. For a long time, Gourmandinet wept over his crime, cursed his gluttony, and despised the wicked queen, Fourbette. At last, he recalled to himself that the hour approached at which Blondine would be expected at the palace. He returned to the stables through the back entrance and ran at once to the queen, who was anxiously expecting him. On seeing him so deadly pale, and his eyes inflamed from the tears of awful remorse, she knew that Blondine had perished. "Is it done?" said she. Gourmandinet bowed his head. He had not the strength to speak. She pointed to a large box full of delicious bonbons of every variety. She commanded a valet to raise the box and place it upon one of the mules which had brought her jewellery. "I confide this box to Gourmandinet in order that he may take it to my father," she said. "Go, boy, and return in a month for another." She placed in his hand at the same time a purse full of gold. Gourmandinet mounted the mule in perfect silence and set off in full gallop. The mule was obstinate and wilful, and soon grew restive under the weight of the box, prancing and kicking. He did this so effectually that he threw Gourmandinet and his precious box of bonbons upon the ground. Gourmandinet, who had never ridden upon a horse or mule, fell heavily with his head upon the stones and died instantly. Thus he did not receive from his crime the profit which he had hoped, for he had not even tasted of the bonbons which the queen had given him. No one regretted him. No one but the poor Blondine had ever loved him.